So this video is going to look at the sexual response cycle. All right, so we have attraction in the people that we're attracted to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a sexual attraction there. All right, what we want to look at is when we are having a almost like sexual arousal. All right, what does that actually look like? What's going on in the body? Okay, so just a couple of things for us to consider is that when we look at sexual response, it's something that's more than just the physical things that are happening. It's more than just biology, right? So yes, we have things like the brain and hormones that are going to be heavily influenced, and we want to look at what's happening there. But other things that could affect the sexual response are things like emotions, culture, the relationship that we actually have with that individual person, personal experiences that we've had in the past, right? So something like sexuality and the sexual response isn't necessarily automatic, right? So it's heavily influenced by our thoughts. Like, what are we thinking on and about in that moment? What's our emotional state like? Are we experiencing stress or something like that? Or are we more at ease and happy? What is our culture? Kind of how's that influenced? What's the quality of the relationship that we actually have with the person? All these things are going to affect arousal and our sense of pleasure, right? So just an example to kind of think about it like this. The same physical touch may feel pleasurable in one situation, but uncomfortable in another, depending on your emotions, the context, the trust you have with the person, right? All those different things are what we want to consider, okay? So a lot of what we know about this, like most things, comes from research. Primary researchers that we want to focus on are Masters and Johnson, right? So during the 50s and 60s, they revolutionized a lot of understanding of what's going on. They did a lot of studies, and what they identified through all their interviews and research is that we progress through 4 phases of sexual response, right? So 4 distinct phases that we follow. And this is true for both men and women, which is some slight changes, right? So it starts with the excitement phase, right? So this is where we'll start to see some physiological changes that are starting to occur as far as things like increased heart rate, blood flow to the genitals, muscle tension, and then where we'll see some slight differences is with men, you'll see an erection of the penis, and then with women, you'll start to see lubrication in the vagina, okay? So as that excitement phase kind of continues, what we'll then see is what they call the plateau phase, right? So this is arousal that has continued to intensify. We're going to see breathing starts to increase, even more muscle tension, and the body is almost like preparing itself for orgasm, okay? So orgasm is the 3rd phase in their model, right? So this is where we have that intense pleasure release, okay? Now, this is where we start to see a little bit of difference between men and women. So men, when they experience orgasm, they immediately will move to the next phase of resolution, whereas women can experience multiple orgasms, and the orgasms can actually extend out for an extended over a period of time, right? So it can keep happening, whereas with men, they have the orgasm, and then it's immediately to the resolution phase, and then there's a period of time where it cannot happen again, like a resting period, okay? Right, so that 4th and final phase, resolution, so your body just returns to baseline. It returns to how it was before, and relaxation is happening. Again, differences here. Once men hit that resolution phase, they need a resting period before any other sexual activity or arousal can take place, whereas with women, almost immediately it can occur again, okay? Now, Masters and Johnson aren't the only ones who have a model. So we see one from Kaplan as well. And so she only has 3 phases in hers, and they vary slightly. So hers is desire, then arousal, and then orgasm, right? So she's not looking at resolution. She doesn't necessarily have the plateau phase. She took out those, but then she added in desire, right? So what the key things she wanted to focus on and emphasize was that sometimes desire starts, let's say, mentally before any physical arousal occurs, okay? And then we have someone like Rosemary Basson, very similar. She was kind of talking about how sexual response isn't always in a linear fashion, and some might not initially feel any kind of desire. They might need like an emotional connection and intimacy first before it can lead to arousal. Okay, so just some different models out there following very similar things. I think the best way to think about it is kind of where do they overlap? Where do we see the similarities between those models? Okay. One of the other things that we're also going to see is that there's something called like the dual control model, right? So the best way to think about it is like a gas pedal and brake, right? So sexual excitement is the gas pedal, sexual inhibition is the brake pedal. These are things that are driving attraction and excitement, right? So things that can increase excitation, things that increase the sexual response and arousal are things like being attracted to somebody, novelty and new experiences, the intimacy that maybe we feel with somebody, fantasy and role play, things like that. But then things that can inhibit us, things that can slow things down, the brake pedal here, when we're experiencing certain negative emotions like stress or fear, anxiety, if we're distracted in any kind of way, right? So what this means is that we can find someone attractive but still not experience arousal if something like stress or anxiety is extremely high. Okay. Now, when we look at the biology side of things as well, there are hormones and neurotransmitters that are involved in all this. So if you look at something like dopamine, often associated with pleasure and reward, makes sense. Testosterone plays a huge role in our sexual desire. One of the things that we see, and you may or may not have heard of before, is oxytocin. All right, so oxytocin is something that's heavily involved in the bonding process and helping us feel attached and connected with other people. And so a lot of this comes down to just like physical touch, right? So things like hugging, cuddling, actual sexual behaviors and activity with someone else, all these things release oxytocin in us. And as we experience oxytocin, we tend to establish a greater connection with that individual, where we start to see things like trust and care and just general affection for that other person. Okay. So some critical thinking questions for us to consider. One is that if love has biological components, which it does, do we feel does that make it feel more or less meaningful to us, right? Knowing that there's a biology side of things, right? Does that kind of take away the sense of love and what romantic ideals we might associate with it? The other one is, if we think about the biology of attraction, and if we try to have an understanding of that, do you think that can have an influence on our relationships with other people? And if so, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Right? So again, with everything that we're learning, we want to see, not only do we just understand the concept and can we understand how it applies to us, but can we apply it in more general ways in our life as well, especially in our relationships with other people.